Before we begin, feel free to get comfortable. If you enjoy quiet history at the end of the day, you can like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always interesting to see listeners joining from different parts of the world and at different times of night. For as long as people have been telling stories, there has been a question that keeps returning. Is our history complete? Or did a great civilization exist before all the ones we know? One that rose, flourished, and then disappeared so completely that only fragments remain. In Western tradition, this idea begins with a name most of us have heard: Atlantis. The story comes from the Greek philosopher Plato, who lived in the 4th century BCE. He described a powerful island civilization that existed long before his time, a society rich, organized, and confident, until it was wiped out by a sudden disaster. To this day, historians still debate what he meant. Did Plato record distant memories passed down from an earlier time? Or did he invent a cautionary tale about pride and collapse? The truth is, no one can say for certain. But the possibility that he preserved a real memory of a lost age has fascinated thinkers ever since. Part of the reason this question has never faded is simple. So much of human history is missing. For most of our past, people left no written records. They built from wood, earth, and stone, materials that don't survive well after thousands of years. Rising seas have swallowed coastlines. Rivers have shifted. Earthquakes, eruptions, and ice have erased nearly everything. What remains is only a thin thread of what once was. And every so often, archaeologists uncover something that doesn't quite fit. A site older than expected, a structure more complex than it should be, or a trace of knowledge that seems to appear without explanation. These discoveries keep the question alive. Could there have been something before us? Plato's Atlantis is only the doorway. To follow the idea deeper, we need to return to his account, to understand what he said, why he said it, and why the debate continues more than 2,000 years later. This is where our story begins. To explore the story of Atlantis properly, we return to its earliest written source. Everything we know begins with Plato. He mentions Atlantis in 2 dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. These were not history books in the way we think of them today, but philosophical works, part storytelling, part teaching tool. According to Plato, the story did not originate with him. He said it came from Solon, a respected Athenian statesman and poet who lived around the 6th century BCE. Solon supposedly heard the tale during his travels in Egypt, where priests in the city of Sais told him of a powerful island civilization that existed more than 9,000 years before his time. That detail alone, 9,000 years earlier, places Atlantis somewhere before 11,000 years ago, far beyond the written history we usually learn. Plato describes Atlantis as an island nation located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, a name used in antiquity for the strait we now call Gibraltar. So, according to this account, Atlantis lay somewhere out in the Atlantic Ocean. In his telling, the civilization was wealthy, well-organized, and technologically advanced for its time. Its capital was arranged in concentric circles of land and water connected by canals. The people of Atlantis were strong, ambitious, and, for a time, governed wisely. But later, as the story goes, their character changed. Their desire for power grew faster than their wisdom. They tried to expand their influence across the known world, eventually challenging Athens itself. And then, suddenly, disaster came. Plato writes that, in a single day and night of misfortune, Atlantis was struck by a great catastrophe. Floods, earthquakes, and the whole island disappeared beneath the sea. Was this meant to be a historical account or a metaphor about moral decline? That question has followed his story for more than 2,000 years. Some scholars argue that Plato invented Atlantis as a teaching tool, a fictional example used to discuss the dangers of arrogance and imbalance. Others point out that he identified specific places, timeframes, and political structures in far more detail than usual for a parable. They note that his source, Solon, was a real political figure, and that the priests of Egypt were known for collecting very old records. Because of this, the debate never settled. What makes Atlantis difficult to prove or dismiss is that our knowledge of ancient history is incomplete. There are periods where records vanish, and long eras where we have only scattered archaeological evidence. Plato's timeline places Atlantis before the end of the last ice age, a time when sea levels were far lower than today. Entire coastlines that people once lived on are now deep underwater. So his tale, strange as it sounds, does not contradict the possibility that a culture could have existed and then been lost long before the civilizations we know. Plato never finished the Critias dialogue. It ends abruptly, as if the story stopped mid-sentence. We don't know whether the rest of his account was ever written, or if it simply didn't survive. But the fragment we have was enough to spark centuries of curiosity. What is certain is this: Plato placed the origin of the story far earlier than most of recorded history. He tied it to real figures, Solon and the Egyptian priests, and to a specific location beyond the Mediterranean world. Whether or not Atlantis existed as Plato described it, his account became the foundation for all discussions that followed. From here, the story moves away from ancient texts and into the physical world, into geology and climate, where researchers continue searching for evidence of a time before history began. In the next part, we look at the period Plato's story points toward, a time of dramatic change at the end of the last ice age, when the Earth shifted so suddenly that entire coastlines disappeared. This chapter is known as the Younger Dryas. To understand why Plato's timeline is so unusual, we have to look at what was happening on Earth around the period he referenced. Roughly 12,000 years ago, the planet was undergoing enormous change. This era is called the Younger Dryas. Before it began, the world was warming. Large ice sheets covering North America and Northern Europe were melting. Temperatures were rising, and people who lived along coastlines or riverbanks would have seen gradual but visible transformations in their environment. Then, suddenly, the warming stopped. The planet slipped back into near-glacial conditions. In a relatively short geological moment, temperatures in many regions dropped sharply. The cooling period lasted for more than 1,000 years before warming resumed. What caused this shift is still debated. One popular explanation suggests that vast amounts of fresh water from melting ice spilled into the North Atlantic, disrupting ocean currents that help regulate climate. Without those currents, temperatures would fall rapidly, and they did. Another theory, more controversial, proposes that a large extraterrestrial object, possibly a fragmented comet, struck or exploded over parts of the northern hemisphere. Supporters of this idea point to layers of unusual material found at archaeological and geological sites dating to this period. These layers contain traces like tiny glassy particles formed by high heat, which some researchers interpret as evidence of a major impact. Whether from disrupted oceans or something falling from the sky, the effect was the same: a dramatic climate shock that arrived faster than most ecosystems could adapt. As the Younger Dryas eventually ended, temperatures rose again, glaciers retreated, and sea levels began climbing, not by a little, but by more than 100 meters over the next several thousand years. Much of the land that people once inhabited would have been swallowed by the ocean. If early coastal settlements existed, most would now be underwater, buried beneath layers of sediment or lost in places that are difficult to investigate. This alone could explain why physical traces of a very old civilization might be missing, not because it never existed, but because its remains lie far below today's shorelines. Across the world, this period of rapid change would have been traumatic. Rivers shifted, forests grew and disappeared, animals migrated or vanished. For the small human communities living through it, memory of such events would likely survive only as stories. Stories of great floods, sudden darkness, or wandering peoples searching for safer land. Later cultures around the world share myths with similar themes: a prosperous time, a disaster, destruction, and survivors forced to begin again. These narratives don't confirm the existence of a lost civilization, but they do show how widespread and lasting the memory of upheaval was. The younger Dryas stands at the center of this discussion because it represents a real, documented moment when the Earth changed quickly enough to erase the familiar world. If a society had risen before that time, whether small or highly developed, much of its physical presence could have vanished in the floods that followed. From here, the story moves from the realm of climate to the realm of archaeology. Because in the last few decades, discoveries have appeared that challenge our picture of how early organized societies formed. One of the most important of these discoveries lies in the southeast of modern-day Turkey, on a hill known as Göbekli Tepe. On a low rise in southeastern Turkey, not far from the city of Şanlıurfa, sits a site that changed how archaeologists think about early human history. It is called Göbekli Tepe. The first stone structures here are dated to around 10,000 BCE, meaning they are approximately 12,000 years old, older than pottery, older than cities like Jericho, and thousands of years older than the Egyptian pyramids. When these stones were being carved and raised, the last ice age had only recently ended. What makes Göbekli Tepe so surprising is not just its age, but its complexity. The site consists of circular enclosures built from large limestone pillars. Some of these pillars stand 5 to 6 meters tall and weigh up to tons. They are arranged in deliberate patterns, with 2 taller central stones standing like guardians inside each circle. Many of the pillars are decorated with detailed carvings: foxes, snakes, birds, and other animals. There are also abstract symbols whose meaning is unknown. This wasn't casual decoration. It required planning, skill, and time. The most unusual part of the story is this: Göbekli Tepe appears to have been built by people who did not yet practice agriculture. At this point in human development, people were still primarily hunter-gatherers. The traditional view in archaeology says that permanent settlements, social organization, and large-scale construction only appear after farming, because agriculture provides stable food supplies and encourages people to stay in one place. Göbekli Tepe disrupts that order. Here we see the opposite sequence. People gathered to build something monumental before farming became established. This raises a difficult question. What brought these early groups together? If not farming, then what held them long enough in one place to carve and raise such enormous stones? Many researchers suggest that shared ritual or belief played a central role. Göbekli Tepe does not appear to be a residential settlement. There are no signs of houses or long-term living spaces. It looks more like a ceremonial center, a place where groups came together for gatherings whose purpose we can only guess. Another surprising detail is that the site was intentionally buried. Over time, the people who used it filled the structures with debris, stones, soil, bones, until the circles were completely covered. Why they did this is still unclear. Some think it was a way of closing a sacred space. Others believe it was practical, preserving older structures while new ones were built nearby. Whatever the reason, the burial protected the site, allowing it to survive nearly intact until it was rediscovered in the late 20th century. Göbekli Tepe forces us to reconsider how and when organized culture emerged. If people without agriculture could plan, carve, transport, and arrange multi-ton stones in complex patterns, then our assumptions about the early stages of civilization need adjusting. It doesn't prove that a forgotten global civilization existed, but it does show that human societies were capable of large-scale cooperation and symbolic expression much earlier than once believed. This discovery opens the door to a broader question. If a place like this could exist so long ago, what else might have been built and later lost during times when rising seas and climate changes reshaped the world? From Göbekli Tepe, the story expands outward. Because it is not the only site that challenges our timeline. Across different regions, there are places that quietly complicate the tidy story of how civilization began. Some are older than expected, others are unexpectedly sophisticated, and together they suggest that the path from simple hunter-gatherer groups to settled societies was not as linear as once believed. One of the earliest permanent settlements known to archaeology is Jericho in the Jordan Valley. Its foundations go back roughly 10,000 years, placing it in the same distant era as Göbekli Tepe. What makes Jericho unusual is its scale. A long-lasting settlement with a stone wall and a tower built from large blocks. These are not temporary shelters. They suggest planning, community effort, and a sense of organized life earlier than many assumed. Further north, in central Anatolia, lies Çatalhöyük, another remarkable site. Dating to about 7,500 BCE, it predates the cities that would later rise in Mesopotamia. The people here built densely packed homes, connected directly to one another, with no streets between them. Residents moved across rooftops and entered their rooms through openings above. Inside, walls were decorated with symbols and images. Some spaces were used for communal rituals. It shows that structured social life, including shared beliefs, existed long before written records. Beyond the Near East, we find large stone constructions appearing in scattered locations, separated by oceans and thousands of years. Their forms differ, but many share the idea of assembling great stones in ways that required both engineering and coordination. In Europe, megalithic sites from the Neolithic period stand across the landscape. The most famous is Stonehenge in southern England, built in several stages between roughly 3000 and 2000 BCE. Its stones, some weighing more than 20 tons, were transported from distant regions. Even without metal tools or wheels, people found a way to move and place them with accuracy. There are older structures as well. On the island of Malta, megalithic temples were built as early as 3600 BCE, long before the Egyptian pyramids. Their stone chambers and altars hint at complex rituals and shared cultural ideas. Farther away, in places like Peru, great stonework appears again. At Sacsayhuaman, massive blocks were shaped and fitted so precisely that even a knife blade cannot pass between them. Though built much later than the earlier sites, the level of craft suggests an understanding of stone and design that still puzzles modern observers. None of these places prove that a forgotten civilization once spread across the globe. What they do show is that different groups, in different periods, were capable of building in ways we once thought belonged only to later ages. The challenge these sites present is not that they reveal a single lost culture, but that they suggest human development was more varied than the simple timeline we often imagine. First farming, then villages, then cities, then monuments. Instead, we find examples where large structures appear before agriculture, where decorations and organized spaces emerge without writing, and where stonework reaches advanced forms long before the tools we associate with precision existed. Taken together, these sites remind us that our current map of ancient history is incomplete. Pieces are missing, and some may lie underwater or buried beyond reach. As new discoveries are made, the story of early humanity continues to shift. From here, the focus turns to a force that might explain why so much evidence has disappeared: the rise of the oceans at the end of the Ice Age. When the last Ice Age ended, the world changed shape. Sea levels rose by roughly 120 meters, and coastlines moved far inland. Entire low-lying regions disappeared beneath the water. Whatever people built near the shore vanished with them. Archaeologists today believe that many of humanity's earliest settlements stood close to the sea, where fishing was easy and travel was simple. The ocean later reclaimed those places, leaving little for us to find. Some clues appear in scattered places. In the Aegean, the island now called Santorini, once known as Thera, erupted with extraordinary force. The event happened around 1610 BCE. Later studies found volcanic ash on Crete, Egypt, and Anatolia. Researchers compared the blast to nearly 200,000 Hiroshima bombs. The eruption triggered a massive tsunami that struck nearby shores. Waves swept across harbors and towns. This real disaster helped shape memories of a great flood, the kind described in myths from Greece to the Near East. Far from the Mediterranean, other coastlines reveal strange traces. Near Bimini in the Bahamas, divers found long paths of rectangular stone blocks resting beneath the water. The discovery happened in the 1960s, and the stones looked as if someone once laid roads there. Near Cuba, at depths of about 700 meters, researchers reported shapes resembling pyramids and carved figures. Some enthusiasts dated them to 10,000 years ago, though the evidence remains debated. More recently, explorers near Cádiz on the southern coast of Spain identified underwater ruins surrounded by walls rising over 6 meters. Their layout reminded some scholars of the Temple of Poseidon described by Plato. These findings suggest that rising seas may have erased entire chapters of human history. Much of what existed along the old coastlines is unreachable now, resting below the waves, beyond ordinary excavation. From here, we move toward the cultures that survived, places where ruins still stand above water, carrying memory into our time. In many cultures, far from one another, there are stories about a time when the world drowned. The characters are different, but the pattern is familiar: a great flood, sudden destruction, and a few who survived to begin again. In Mesopotamia, one of the oldest written tales, the Epic of Gilgamesh, tells of a man warned to build a vessel before the waters arrived. He preserved life and later released birds to search for dry ground. The story was recorded on clay tablets more than 3,000 years ago, yet it already described events from a distant past. In the Hebrew tradition, the book of Genesis speaks of Noah. He saves his family and animals by building an ark. When the waters fall, the story says his vessel came to rest on high land. This account echoes the older Mesopotamian version, suggesting they may share a common memory. In Greece, several ancient writers told of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who escaped a great flood sent by the gods. According to the myth, they landed on Mount Parnassus and later repopulated the land. The story was familiar to Greeks long before Plato spoke of Atlantis. Far away, in India, A tale describes a figure guided by a mysterious being who warns him of rising waters. He builds a boat and survives the disaster. When the waters fall, he renews life in the world. Among the Maya in Central America, there is a cycle about earlier worlds destroyed by floods before the present era began. In Australia, Aboriginal stories speak of rising seas swallowing the coasts. Some of these accounts contain descriptions of places that are now underwater. Even in northern regions, the Finnish Kalevala preserves fragments of floods and rebirth. Across the Pacific, Polynesian stories describe land lost beneath the ocean and long journeys to safer shores. When so many cultures preserve similar memories, it encourages reflection. These stories formed independently across continents and oceans. They were passed down orally for thousands of years, and they remain among the oldest narrative layers each culture possesses. Their similarities do not settle the question of Atlantis. They do, however, show that ancient peoples remembered sudden change. They spoke of the sea rising, of homes lost, of survivors seeking new land. These stories may contain pieces of real events, not complete histories, but impressions of what communities lived through during the unpredictable end of the Ice Age, and later catastrophes such as volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. Memory can survive long after cities crumble. Myth does not always mean invention. In many cultures, myths served as a way to record knowledge before writing existed. Stories kept essential lessons alive, that the world was not always as it is now, that great cities could fall, and that people could be forced to begin again. These shared memories form another thread in the search for earlier civilizations, not as proof, but as reminders that the ancient world experienced upheavals powerful enough to leave marks in human storytelling across the globe. From here, we look at places where people have tried to trace those memories to the land itself, regions proposed as the possible home of the society Plato described. The most well-known of these proposals leads back toward the Mediterranean and the Atlantic world, where researchers have searched for ruins that match the old accounts. If a society once existed before the period we recognize as the start of civilization, traces of it would not necessarily survive in stone. Pieces of its knowledge, however, could have been carried forward by people who lived through periods of upheaval. Many ancient cultures show sudden steps forward. The changes appear in ways that are difficult to explain through slow development alone. In different regions, within a relatively short time frame, we see organized settlement, large monument building, and a growing understanding of the sky. In Egypt, the first pyramids appear around the 3rd millennium BCE. The builders understood geometry, measurement, and orientation. Structures were aligned with remarkable precision. Several are positioned to reflect patterns in the night sky. Far to the west, on the coast of present-day Peru, the ancient city complex of Caral rose around 2600 BCE, roughly as early as the pyramids. This was a society without written language, yet it created large ceremonial centers, terraced buildings, and a shared architectural style that stretched across the region. Elsewhere, in Mesoamerica, cultures developed an advanced understanding of cycles in the sky. Tables tracking the motions of the sun, moon, and planets appear in records from later periods, but the mathematical roots behind them must have been older. These developments do not prove that such knowledge came from an earlier lost civilization. They do show that ideas about the stars, timekeeping, and structure appeared in multiple places, sometimes suddenly, without a clear local prototype. Some researchers suggest that fragments of older understanding could have been passed on verbally. People displaced by floods, volcanic eruptions, or other disasters might have carried stories, building traditions, or methods of measurement to new regions. Over generations, these fragments could mix with local knowledge and evolve into the systems we see later. Oral memory is not precise, but it can preserve core elements. How to track seasons, how to mark important stars, how to build with stone. In many traditions, knowledge was tied to ritual or myth. This made it resilient. Even if the story changed, the practice survived. This idea remains only a possibility. Archaeology has not produced clear evidence of a single origin point behind all early knowledge. Yet, the appearance of similar themes, monument building, astronomical alignment, shared myths of destruction and renewal, encourages questions about how people learned so quickly. Whether these skills developed independently, or whether small groups carried older ideas into new eras, the result is the same. Across the ancient world, people began building in ways that show planning, cooperation, and a desire to understand their surroundings. The next part of this story examines a different view, how scientists and historians respond to these ideas, and why evidence can be difficult to evaluate. That discussion brings us to the ongoing debate around early civilizations and the limits of what we can prove. Even without certainty, the idea of a lost civilization refuses to disappear. Part of the reason is simple. Unanswered questions draw us in. When records are incomplete and ruins speak quietly, imagination fills the gaps. Every few years, new findings appear. A buried structure, an unexpected date, a site that does not fit the accepted timeline. None of these discoveries settle the debate, but each one adds a small piece that invites us to look again. The story of Atlantis connects to something deeper than geography. It speaks to origins, where people came from, what was forgotten, and how fragile memory can be. Most cultures carry stories about the beginning of their world. These tales are not always literal histories. They are ways of understanding identity and place. For some, Atlantis is a symbol of human potential. For others, it represents a warning that greatness can be lost and knowledge can disappear. The idea that a society could rise, flourish, and then vanish is both unsettling and strangely familiar. History shows that even powerful cultures can fall, leaving only fragments behind. There is also an emotional dimension. People want to believe that the past still holds secrets, that the world is larger than what textbooks describe. A buried city beneath the sea, a forgotten age of builders and explorers, a memory carried through myth. These ideas give the ancient world a sense of depth. This curiosity is not only romantic, it reflects an honest awareness of how little survives from distant times. The earliest chapters of humanity are mostly missing. What we know rests on limited evidence, scattered sites, and stories that reached us through many retellings. Because of this, the question remains open. Some approach it with speculation, others with caution, but very few are indifferent. The possibility of a hidden past continues to encourage research, travel, and debate. Whether Atlantis was real or symbolic, the idea has shaped how generations think about history. It reminds us that the world we see now is only one version, built on top of older landscapes, older stories, and older lives. The search is ongoing, not because we expect a single answer, but because the journey itself reveals how rich and complex the past can be. From here, the story moves toward a quiet close, a moment to reflect on what has been told and how these questions speak to our present as much to our past. When we look at the distant past, we are working with fragments. Some are made of stone, some are carried in stories, and some are only questions. Together, they create a picture that is incomplete, yet still remarkable. We may never know whether Plato recorded a memory of a real place or shaped a story to express an idea. The world he described lies far beyond the reach of written history, buried under water, soil, and time. Its traces, if any remain, are thin. Even so, research continues. New tools make it possible to scan landscapes, survey the seafloor, and date materials with greater precision. In recent years, techniques such as satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar have revealed ancient structures hidden beneath deserts and forests, places no one knew were there. Underwater exploration is still limited, but each expedition opens another possibility. As science advances, our understanding of early humanity shifts. Ideas once dismissed become worth reconsidering. Sites once unknown become part of the record. What seems unlikely today may look different tomorrow. For now, the story remains open. It invites curiosity rather than conclusion. Some will search for answers, others will simply enjoy the mystery. Both approaches have a place. Thank you for spending this time here. If you'd like to join us again for another quiet journey through history, you can like the video and tell us where you're watching from. Until next time, rest well.